You've probably caught yourself apologizing and then immediately thinking, wait, why did I just say that? Maybe someone walked into you. Maybe you were about to share an opinion you were totally confident in. Maybe nothing even happened. The apology just came out, fully formed, before you ever consciously decided to say it. And that moment right after, that tiny flash of confusion where part of you goes, huh? That's actually the most important moment in this whole conversation. Because that gap between the apology and the awareness of it, that's where something really interesting lives. That's where something really interesting lives. This isn't a bad habit you picked up from watching too many British period dramas. It's not simple politeness either. For a lot of people, reflexive apologizing is a nervous system behavior. Something that runs on a track so deep and so automatic. Your mouth is already saying sorry before your prefrontal cortex has even registered there's a situation to respond to. And the reason that happens has everything to do with what your brain learned early on about how to stay safe around other people. There's a region in your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. It sits tucked in the middle of your brain. One of its main jobs is conflict monitoring, scanning your social environment for signs of tension, disapproval, or potential threat. It's always running in the background, like a low-level alarm system, picking up on tone shifts, micro-expressions, the slight edge in someone's voice. And in most people, it does its job without ever pulling you into a full alert. It notices things and lets them pass. But for people who grew up in emotionally unpredictable environments, homes where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where peace was fragile and easily shattered, this system gets calibrated differently. It gets trained to treat social discomfort as a genuine threat, not a metaphorical threat, a real one. And the behavioral pattern it develops to manage that threat is what researchers sometimes call a fawn response. Appeasement behavior, designed to neutralize conflict before it escalates, or sometimes before it even exists. The fawn response gets less attention than fight, flight, or freeze, but it's just as automatic. It's the part of your nervous system that learned, usually before you were old enough to have any say in the matter, that the fastest and safest way to survive tension was to smooth it over, to make yourself smaller, to go first with warmth and accommodation, because waiting for conflict to land was scarier than heading it off. And apologizing, even when there's nothing to apologize for, is one of the most efficient appeasement behaviors that exists. It immediately signals non-aggression. It hands the other person a kind of social power. It says, without saying it, I am not a threat to you. Please don't be one to me. This is where it gets really specific, and where most conversations about over-apologizing miss something important. People usually frame this as a self-esteem issue. The assumption is that people who apologize too much just don't believe in themselves, don't value their own needs, don't think they deserve space. And sometimes that's part of it. But that framing puts the whole thing in the conscious mind, like it's a belief you hold that you could just update. If someone convinced you hard enough that you're worthy, that's not quite what's happening for a lot of people. What's happening is closer to conditioned submission, a learned behavioral reflex that operates below the level of belief. You might have a completely healthy sense of your own worth and still apologize before every opinion you share. You might genuinely know you didn't do anything wrong and still feel a wave of physical urgency to say sorry the moment you sense even a flicker of someone else's irritation. That urgency isn't coming from a thought. It's coming from a circuit in your nervous system that got wired when thoughts weren't available yet. When all you had was sensation and reaction and the urgent need to make the room feel safe. That is where this begins. There's research worth knowing here. Work done on what's called preemptive de-escalation. Apologizing not after conflict, but before any conflict has materialized. This pattern is particularly common in individuals who experienced what developmental psychologists call emotional unpredictability in primary caregivers. The key isn't the type of household exactly, it's the unpredictability. When a child can't consistently predict how an adult will react, the child's social threat detection system stays in a kind of permanent low-grade alert, and the behaviors that reduce that alert get reinforced over and over. Smiling, accommodating, apologizing, softening, get reinforced over and over until they're not choices anymore. They're automatic. A study worth knowing specifically comes from researcher Martin Paulus and colleagues, whose work on interoception and threat sensitivity found that individuals with early adverse social environments show significantly heightened activation in anterior cingulate and insular regions in response to ambiguous social signals, things like a neutral face, a pause in conversation, the absence of warmth. The brain flags ambiguity as danger, and it moves to neutralize it. An apology is one of the fastest social tools available for doing exactly that. And here's the part that might genuinely catch you off guard. For many people who apologize reflexively, the apology doesn't even feel like submission in the moment. It feels like care. It feels like being a considerate person. It feels sometimes like the generous thing to do, because the story the nervous system tells is not, I am afraid. The story is, I am thoughtful, I am kind, I make space for others. And that's not untrue. People with this pattern are often genuinely warm and attuned to others. The problem isn't the care. The problem is the cost. The chronic, low-level vigilance of always monitoring the emotional temperature of a room is exhausting, even when you don't consciously notice you're doing it. Think about the last time you were about to disagree with someone, a friend, a colleague, someone you respect. Notice if there was a moment where you prefaced your disagreement with some version of, I'm sorry, but, or, sorry to push back on this. You weren't actually sorry. You had a perspective, but the apology went in first, like a cushion. Because some part of you was already doing social threat detection, already scanning for how they might react, already trying to manage an emotional response that hadn't even happened yet. That's the anterior cingulate doing its job, a job it learned to do with extreme sensitivity, because at some point, getting that read wrong actually mattered. The interesting and honestly kind of bittersweet thing about all of this is that the behavior worked. It worked when you were small, and the emotional weather around you was unpredictable. Apologizing probably did smooth things over. It probably did make the room safer, at least in the short term. Your nervous system learned something real. It just never got the update that the environment changed. This is why telling yourself to just stop apologizing rarely works, and can sometimes feel weirdly impossible. You're not fighting a habit, you're fighting a survival pattern, and survival patterns don't respond to logic the way habits do. They respond to repeated experience of safety, the slow accumulating evidence that disagreement doesn't have to be dangerous, that taking up space doesn't lead to the punishments your nervous system remembers even if your conscious mind has forgotten them. Some therapists working in somatic and attachment-based modalities describe this process as renegotiating the nervous system's prediction model, because that's what the brain is always doing, making predictions based on past data. If your past data says, tension leads to rupture, rupture is dangerous, preemptive apology prevents rupture, your brain is going to keep generating that output until new data builds a different model. And new data has to be felt, not just understood. So the next time you catch yourself apologizing for something that wasn't your fault, or before a sentence you haven't even finished yet, try not to make it mean something sweeping about your character. What it actually is evidence of a very sophisticated and very loyal protection system, doing exactly what it was trained to do. The question worth sitting with isn't, why am I like this? The question is, what would it feel like to let the room be a little uncomfortable and stay in it anyway? Not because discomfort is good, but because you might find out it's survivable. And that's a very different thing to learn than anything your nervous system currently believes. You've probably caught yourself apologizing and then immediately thinking, wait, why did I just say that? That gap is where everything begins. Your mouth is already saying sorry before your brain has even registered. There's a situation. This is not a habit. This is a nervous system pattern. The anterior cingulate cortex is always scanning for tension, disapproval, or potential threat. A low-level alarm running in the background constantly. It gets trained to treat social discomfort as a genuine threat when you grow up in emotionally unpredictable environments. The fawn response, appeasement behavior, runs just as automatically as fight, flight, or freeze. It learned to smooth tension before it even exists. Apologizing signals non-aggression instantly. It hands social power to the other person. It says, I am not a threat. Please don't be one to me. This is not a self-esteem issue. It's conditioned submission. A reflex operating below the level of conscious belief entirely. You might know you did nothing wrong and still feel physical urgency to apologize the moment someone seems even slightly irritated. Preemptive de-escalation is most common in people who experienced emotional unpredictability from caregivers. The system stays in permanent low-grade alert. Martin Paulus's research found heightened brain activation in response to ambiguous social signals. A neutral face, a pause, the absence of warmth. The apology doesn't feel like fear. It feels like care, like thoughtfulness, like generosity. That's the story the nervous system tells. The cost is chronic vigilance, always monitoring the emotional temperature of every room, exhausting even when you don't notice you're doing it. The behavior worked when you were small. Apologizing did make the room safer. Your nervous system learned something real. It just never got the update. You're not fighting a habit. You're fighting a survival pattern. Survival patterns don't respond to logic. They respond to repeated experience of safety. Renegotiating the nervous system's prediction model requires new data that is felt, not just understood. The brain keeps predicting from old data. What would it feel like to let the room be a little uncomfortable and stay in it anyway? Not because discomfort is good, but because it's survivable.